Irresistible force, immovable object on one side of the ball when we see Ohio State play Iowa. On the other side, some folks that grow corn are going to be praying to the heavens, I guess, for rain and for some other miracles or something. Anyway, it's the Buckeyes and the Hawkeyes at Ohio Stadium for the first time since 2013. The two teams get together for the first time since 2017. This is our Buckeyes show here live each and every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, courtesy Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Huddle, and of course, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Huddle as well. Guys, how we doing?
Good.
Doing great.
Here we go. Let's talk coaching staff in regards to the interviews and news conferences that you guys attended this week. Tony, we'll start with you. Ryan Day, Kevin Wilson, Jim Knowles at the podium. What were your biggest takes?
I think my biggest takeaway from Ryan Day is the legit respect he has for the Iowa defense, and probably say the same thing for Kevin Wilson as well, just because it's the same defense they've been running since Kirk Ferentz has been there, but it's the same defense they've been running since Kirk Ferentz has been there. And what Ryan Day was saying is that they have faced every single offensive attack that you can imagine. And so they know how every offense tries to attack the Iowa defense. And so Iowa has counters to counters, and they've seen it all, and the players have seen it all because they've been there. These are all generally upperclassmen who have played for years. That it's rare for a true freshman or a sophomore to come in and start and play a bunch. So these are experienced players and experienced defense, and it's coaches know what they want to call, and they know what offenses are going to try to do. So they keep everything in front of you and make you work for it. And Ohio State has been patient, relatively patient, but with these receivers and this quarterback, how long can they stay patient? And for Ryan Day, it's just a matter of just continue to just move the change, just stay ahead of the change, and eventually you'll get there. But then you get into the red zone where Iowa's defense is even better. And so it's going to be a real test offensively for the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, kind of going through that as well as the cat decides to bother me during the show as usual. Ryan Day, we heard more about an opponent this week than we have probably since Notre Dame, to be honest, because the Iowa defense is real. And, there have been a lot of opponents that Ohio State has faced that have been number 6 against the run, number 8 against the pass, things like that, because they hadn't played anybody. And, I think we're really going to get to see what the Iowa defense is about. I mean, Ryan Day and the assistants, a lot of credit to these athletes, maybe guys that weren't the highest star ranked kids out there in terms of the recruiting services, but they're good in the system. Guys weren't necessarily, mentioned by name, but, guys like Jack Campbell, obviously Riley Moss. Iowa always seems to have players on defense, and they're guys that have been, this system has been going on since the beginning of time. And as Tony had said, you do this, we've already seen that before. We saw that before in 2020. We saw that before in 2017. We know how to adjust to it. So it's going to be a constant game of cat and mouse in terms of trying to stay ahead of what the Iowa defense is going to do. I liken just the way that system is kind of like where Northwestern used to be under former defensive coordinator Mike Hankwitz. You knew what they were going to do. It was just a matter of getting out there and out executing them. And, there were some fun stories from both Jim Knowles and from Kevin Wilson about particular players and things. But, with this kind of being the Iowa preview show, a lot of respect for the defense. And, nobody was going to take the bait and say that the Iowa offense is compromised or challenged or anything like that. And I think that the most, loyal Hawkeye fan out there is not going to disagree, because none of those terms are necessarily being aggressively ugly toward it. It is challenged. It is compromised. And, that's for us to write about, and the players are going to get out there. And I mean, let's not get too far away from the 17 game. Ohio State was a 21-point favorite going into Iowa City and got blindsided by a combine. So, there's nobody's going to look past this. Remember, it was Ryan Day's first year on the Ohio State staff, and he described it as a scar, and as a scar that's not going to heal. So, don't expect him to sit there and read the press clippings that Spencer Petras can't hit water if he falls out of a boat, or that Iowa can't run, or whatever. They're going to come in fully prepared for the Hawkeyes.
as I look through past seasons, and again, it's basically the same defense every year for Iowa. They seem to struggle against the teams that can throw the ball, like Purdue has been able to throw the ball. Purdue has scored multiple touchdowns against them each season, and like every season of the last 6 of the last 7 seasons, more than 2 touchdowns, and sometimes 5. And saying that oh wow, somebody scored 3 touchdowns against Iowa. That's not a lot, but compared to what they normally give up, like Purdue's passing game consistently scores more than everybody else against Iowa. And I think when you look at what Ohio State does offensively, the passing game is hard to ignore. And there's some similarities there in just terms of stretching out and spreading the Iowa defense. And so you would think that they would be obviously a tough matchup for Iowa. And eventually you do enough moving the ball down the field. Your quarterback is accurate enough. You run the ball well enough, and you finish with 4 to 5 touchdowns and a 3 to 4 touchdown win.
And I don't want to get too far ahead into where my preview is going to be. I've written it one place. It has made it over to an Iowa board in the Rivals Network with my score. But this is a kind of game that I could see being close-ish in terms of that the Iowa defense stymies the Ohio State offense early on, but there's going to be a point where the defense is going to look over at the offense and be like, are we the only ones who showed up today? And at some point the dam breaks, and I think that's probably where Vegas is in terms of having this. I guess somebody in the chat said that the line is 28 at this point. I've seen it as high as 29.5. You look at an Iowa team that doesn't give up a lot of points really in this season. It'll be interesting to see how Ohio State attacks there. It'll be interesting to see, if Iowa's going to force Ohio State to try and run the ball on them, if they're going to keep everything underneath. What's going to go on that way? But the truth of the matter is, we're looking at an Iowa offense that has scored 7 touchdowns and an Iowa defense that has scored 2 touchdowns. So 9 touchdowns on the season and 2 of them coming on defense. Woof.
Yeah, Ohio State has 2 players that have outscored the Iowa offense, when you've got Marvin Harrison with 9 touchdowns, Mayan Williams with 8, and Emeka with 7 himself. And I will be interested to see what the red zone defense does for Iowa. Ohio State leads the nation in touchdown percentage in the red zone, scoring on, I believe, 27 of 29 or 25 of 27 trips into the red zone, scoring touchdowns. And Ohio State has attempted 3 field goals. If Iowa can hold Ohio State to field goals in the red zone, then the margin is obviously going to look much better for them, even if the game is just as dominated.
So in a few points, of course, Kevin, as well as I do, that the defense is looking over at the offense pretty much about 9 times a season with the same look and in the same like, hey, when are we going to get some help? So I don't think that's going to be any kind of new sensation for those guys. They just got through a 9-6 loss to Illinois. And obviously Illinois is a good team, solid team, good defense. But hey, put the ball in the end zone once, maybe. Come on. Rutgers, they scored 1 touchdown. The defense scored 2 touchdowns. It's mind-boggling when you run those kind of statistics against just what the average team does. Just the way football operates in general. The offense has the ball in its hands. It's much easier for them to score, seemingly, than the defense that doesn't have the football. It's crazy. The other thing, to allude back to what you guys were talking about, is it's one thing to say, this team's off to a good start. The metrics, the stats look good, but who have they played? And the same could be said for Ohio State. But when it's a program that's been in play with the same characters filling the same roles, in this case, Phil Parker is the defensive coordinator, then you can trust what they're doing, even if the opponents are marginal. You can trust that, okay, this happens every year. This is what we get every year. And this is just a carbon copy of what they do and who they are. And we can trust that they're pretty much as good as advertised.
The Iowa defense deserves so much better than the Iowa offense. And we can look at the Roman Empire and how it went down, because sons that probably were not qualified for the job ended up getting the main job. And Brian Ferentz, here we are, 10 minutes into the show, and the first Brian Ferentz mention that I can remember on here has steered that ship that really has not really been a huge offensive juggernaut under him right into the iceberg. And I mean, I just don't understand. There was an exchange, I guess, this week over there about why Spencer Petras, why don't they go to the backup quarterback? And it's like, well, why do we go to the backup quarterback? Well, because Spencer Petras has largely been ineffective. He has 2 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions on the year. He's a 54% passer, if I'm recalling. Here is a stat that I'm going to be dropping in my tail of the tape here in 35 minutes. Spencer Petras, through his career, 5-year career, starting for about 2.5 years, has 2 fewer career passing yards than C.J. Stroud had in 2021. C.J. Stroud in 2021 passed for 4,435 yards. Spencer Petras, through his entire Iowa career, has passed for 4,433 yards. So, this is not necessarily an issue of, 2021 or 2022 is some sort of outlier. You sit there and you look at Charlie Jones and another receiver transferred out of Iowa to go to Purdue and are lighting it up. And yes, I understand that Aiden O'Connell is a very prolific passer. Jeff Brom runs a very pass-friendly offense out there. But what would the stats be of this tandem if they stayed in Iowa City? I mean, maybe they might have another touchdown, 2 touchdowns. I'm not sure, but there is a huge indictment of where this Iowa offense is, and it starts. It doesn't start with Brian Ferentz. It starts with Kirk, because Kirk put him in this position. He was the enabler.
Yeah, the whole Charlie Jones phenomenon is just crazy. That what my thought of Charlie Jones in the offseason when he left for Purdue was, this guy's a nice player. He's more of a special teams guy, more of a threat as a punt and punt returner. He's more of that kind of guy. And I think he's a decent receiver, but when he only catches 15 passes a season, like this guy is almost catching as many passes in a game as a season. I think he had 21 catches last year. He's catching 12 and 13 balls a game for Purdue. He was obviously a weapon. I heard him, an NFL scout, if the color analyst was being accurate, which I got to trust that they are, that there were NFL scouts in the building that likened him to Deshaun Jackson. And it's like, this guy can't be utilized in an offense. You're this archaic that you can't figure out a way to utilize a guy like this.
And it's pretty telling that he ran as quickly as he could. He got out of there, and it was a smart move. And I would expect more players to leave if there are, in fact, any players that are good enough to play elsewhere. And, Luke Lachey, being a tight end, it can play anywhere. But also being a tight end at Iowa is, probably a tight end's dream. And so is that somewhere you want to leave? But when you watch this offense, it is so difficult for them to do anything. I go back to the Michigan game where there was they went for it on 4th and 2 and they threw a 1-yard out, and it was like it took everything for them to just get 1 yard down the field, and it's so painful to watch. And this poor defense is 2-1 in games in which they have not allowed a touchdown, and that's unfair that your defense can hold a team out of the end zone and lose 9-6, and it's not a surprise anymore. And it's one of those things where the dad loves his son, the son loves his dad. And when Brian Ferentz was asked last week about, have you thought about resigning? Like, no, I'm not the kind that gives up. I'm going to dig in, and it just keeps digging and digging. And it reminds me of the Simpsons episode where they're like digging a well and they're stuck in it. And Homer says, we'll dig our way out. And he starts digging down further. And it's like, no, you got to dig up. And Brian Ferentz has yet to dig up, and they don't have the skill to do it. They don't have the game planning. They don't have the coaches to do it. And as I always say, I'll say it on every show. I say it on my show, bad offense is a choice. There are enough ways out there to have a good offense. And if you choose to have a bad offense, that's a choice by the head coach. and he should be I don't know, punished or whatever like this. That's on him, and it's as Kevin said, that starts with him, and it's his decision to we're okay being last in the Big Ten in scoring. That's what we are, and I like that because you don't have to be, and if you choose to be, then as I said, it's a choice.
Absolutely, because point well taken on the personnel not being probably where it could be if they actually had an offense that would attract better recruits through both high school and transfer portal. But when we see in the same conference, Indiana fire its offensive line coach, and Rutgers, that's like 25 or 30 spots higher in the offensive rankings nationally, fire its offensive coordinator, that they have higher standards. And their offenses, especially Indiana's, is prolific compared to Iowa's. And they actually choose to, okay, we can be better. We need to do better. There are people not doing their jobs. And I guarantee that those guys have not been on their jobs for 6 seasons.
Well, maybe Jack Tuttle can transfer to Iowa because, I mean, he couldn't beat out Connor Bazelak, but he would beat out Spencer Petras 10 times out of 10. I mean, maybe 11 times out of 10, unless they adopted Petras and they're, and he's an honorary Ferentz or something. Because I don't understand. I mean, I don't mean to put him into Jack Cohn status, but I just do not see anything there that is offensively redeeming. Nothing. And you don't have to worry about him running. He's averaging like minus however many yards a game because of sack adjusted and everything else. So it's not like, well, he can't throw the ball, but at least he can scramble and prolong drives and maybe keep the Ohio State offense on the sideline. He can't. And, I just don't get it.
You know who can do that, Kevin? The backup. The backup's not Michael Vick, but he's mobile. He's a mobile quarterback. He has time in the system, and he's played. He played last year. If you look at his numbers and look at the team's production on offense, it's not great, but it's a step up from Spencer Petras. So they've got a backup that is shown in limited time, but in meaningful games, he had to play due to injury, that he at least presents that threat.
The other thing is just when you have an offense that is this bad and you choose to have an offense this bad, you cannot attract recruits. You cannot attract anybody from the transfer portal worth anything. And I will point to Tennessee that got Hendon Hooker from Virginia Tech. Iowa could go get somebody from Virginia Tech. Jalen Hyatt, the receiver, was once committed. The receiver that scored 5 touchdowns against Alabama was once committed to Virginia Tech. So like this is possible. And these guys, there's so many good players around the nation that hit the portal because of where they are, they can't play. And if Iowa was an attractive option, is there a less attractive offensive option in the Big Ten, maybe Northwestern? Like I could see a quarterback wanting to play at Purdue. I can see a running back wanting to play at Minnesota. Like all of these different schools. Quarterback, we saw Casey Thompson want to play at Nebraska. Who in their right mind is Hudson Card going to want to play at Iowa? No. Why would you? And until there are significant changes with that offense and the style and in the scheme, like you're not going to draw. You can't recruit, and you're not going to get in players who have already been developed at other schools who could be plug and play guys for you. There's no attraction there. There's no reason to come to Iowa and play there. It's that kind of playing time is not worth it.
If Iowa were going out there and it were a matter of they were trying to do things, they were being creative, they were attempting to run an offense and they were unsuccessful, that would resonate better. It's a matter of that they are going out there and failing with ineptitude rather than with indifference. I mean, it's indifference. That's what their offense is. I could deal with incompetence if they were just incompetent with what they were doing, but we're trying, we're doing what we can or whatever. All right, that's one thing, but it's indifferent. It's like, well, we know everybody here's to see the defense, and it is a remarkable defense, but you're not going to win many games. And when you go, what was it like 7-3 against South Dakota State to open the season with the safeties and everything else? I mean, that's novel. That's fun. South Dakota State's a really good FCS team, yada, yada, yada. oh, they go out and they beat Nevada, who's legitimately one of the worst FBS teams out there, 20 something to nothing. And then everything else has just been kind of pain and suffering. And the people that, that have been, had the most pain are the people that have to watch it. I mean, seriously, if I were in that hospital, I'd say, can I have a room on the other side? I really don't want to watch the game. I don't want to watch the game. I've already been dealt a tough hand.
My favorite stat from the South Dakota game was the 7-3 score and the way it was produced, obviously, with the field goals and the safeties. But in addition to that, the one field goal, so the one scoring drive for the offense, 5 yards to get the field goal. It was a 5-yard drive. The defense set up the field goal.
Iowa averaged 2.7 yards per play in that game. Like even 3 yards in a cloud of dust still leaves you like a 4th and 2.
Yeah,
2.7 times 4. I mean, if you get 2.7 every time, you're unstoppable.
Don't miss Kevin's Tale of the Tape. That's going to be released. You can join it right after you're here. And Kevin, where's the best way to find that?
Yeah, you can find that over at this new exciting website. It's called BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony joins me over there along with a great staff, including Mark Givler, Alex Gleitman, Tom Orr, Ross Fulton, a bunch of other analysts. We got, everything going on over there, but you can find that at 12 o'clock. It is a members-only exclusive, so why don't you give us a try, be able to read Tale of the Tape and some other great pieces out there. Alex Gleitman dropped his A-deck as it's going to be a nice little recruiting weekend for the Buckeyes. As can you believe it? We're 6 games left, and Ohio State still has 3 of them on the road, so there are not a lot of home dates left. I mean, obviously there's that big one at the end of November, but check us out there. You can of course find me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon, and you can find all of my podcasts on all of your podcasting channels, and of course at YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle.
Tony, what do you have going on this week?
Well, Kevin said all of the Buckeye Huddle stuff, and I appreciate that, and it would echo all of that. I just won't repeat it, but check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman. Buckeye Weekly Podcast is the podcast. We'll be dropping one today talking about a whole bunch of Ohio State stuff, and then tomorrow will be our bold predictions show. I posted a story today about Ohio State's defense and how does Jim Knowles know that his defense will be ready for offenses like Tennessee and Alabama and those kinds of offenses down the road. And as Kevin alluded to, there's some funny stories from Jim Knowles. His daughter attended Tennessee, so he's like, yeah, I watched the game. I'm familiar with Tennessee. I've sent a lot of money to Tennessee. And his daughter was texting him LFG Vols during the game, so he was well aware of what was going on in that game, and talked about how it was very reminiscent of the stuff that he faced in the Big 12 at Oklahoma State, which is why he designed his defense to do what it does. So you can find that story actually right now or after the show at BuckeyeHuddle.com.
BuckeyeHuddle.com. Get on over there. You get both of these guys. My goodness. One quick note. I don't want to detract from the football conversation here, but really quick. We had an unfortunate incident on our main channel. Somebody deleted 14 videos, and it wasn't done in an honest, unintentional way. So it was done in a malicious way. So always be careful of who you trust. And so just understand that I'm kind of caught in the middle. It's dated videos. They're recent videos, but if I upload them again, they're dated. If they only get a fraction of the views, then actually YouTube's going to frown on that and look down on that and suppress that, not in a malicious way, but just that's the way the algorithms work. So I don't know if that I'm working to get those videos reinstated, but again, it's kind of a lost cause. So just not asking for any sympathy, just support the channel. Please hit the like button, support what we do, watch the content and so forth. But, Big 10 rankings, ACC rankings, power rankings, SEC, my top 25, those things wiped out. The live streams over the weekend actually had a Michigan Penn State instant analysis that was well over 20,000 views, and that was taken, and it's affected the 100,000 views lost the revenue on the channel. So just support what we do here if you enjoy what we do. If you don't, then I would suggest you move on. But we appreciate Tony and Kevin being here. All right, 2017 was brought up by myself off the top, and you guys brought it up as well because it was Ryan Day's first year on the staff. Does Ryan Day use that to motivate the team? Obviously, none of them, we talked about this during the off season. What do we got? 3 or 4, I don't want to call them insignificant, but not impact players on the team that were on the roster at that point. Do you connect those two to say, hey, the pride of the school, the program, the university, we were taken to the woodshed? Is that a motivating factor?
I think, I'll be quick on this because I know Tony's got an idea as well on it. I think you said last time we went out on the field against these guys, they beat us. Not only did they beat us by 31 points. So don't take anything for granted. Don't go out there and, I know walking across the oval, people are like, oh, you're a 4-touchdown favorite, so what are you going to, what are you going to do during third quarter when you're not playing anymore because this game's out of hand? I think you can sit there and say, look at the unpredictability of college football. Look at last weekend where there were a lot of upsets and whatnot. And you've got attention to detail, competitive excellence, all of those buzzwords that they use out there can all be tied into 55-24. But I think if anything, it's going to keep certain coaches on the Ohio State staff that remember that staff as dialed in as possible, because we certainly we know what the defense is capable of doing. I mean, we have 6 examples from this season, and what happens if they're able to break a play or two? I mean, if they hang around and then Ohio State suddenly is like, whoa, what's going on here? I mean, there's a lot that can be drawn from it.
Yeah, Ryan Day talked about his scars that he still has from this game, and those scars have had to just fester and sit and wait for this game. And I think you definitely have to bring it up because while I don't know that anybody traveled, I don't think Jerron Cage traveled to that game. It's something that is on the mind of the Ohio State coaches that were here. Ask Larry Johnson about it, see how he feels about it. And it's one of those things that it was a shocking thing. Not a shock that you lose on the road at Iowa. It's just shocking in how it happened and the way it happened and what went down and the immediate pick 6. And then from there, it's just, everything that went bad could, and the tackling was even worse. And the gameplay and the coverage, all of it was terrible. And Iowa took advantage of it. And that's one of those things that Ryan Day says where Iowa knows their offense and defense better than yours. And so they can just take advantage of what they know is going to happen. And so, yeah, it's brought up. I'm sure there's some clips that Ryan Day is watching, showing to his team that, that still hurt him. And not that this will change anything, but if it keeps it from happening again, then, it's one of those scars that you've put to good use.
We all remember TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant having 4 touchdowns between them, but people don't remember that Iowa ran for something like 240 yards in that game and possessed the ball for 10 more minutes than Ohio State did. And, it was a thorough domination in that game for the Hawkeyes over Ohio State. And there certainly was a point where Ohio State just kind of said, no mas, Roberto Duran, we're done. And it just kind of got out of hand at that point. But, I think that there's a lot that can be taken from that. I mean, getting 85 scholarship players, 110 players when you have walk-ons and everything else all pointed in the same direction takes a lot. And, this is a very easy game just from looking at the line and looking at the season results to just come out and kind of sleepwalk through. Iowa has Ohio State's full attention, and I know we have an Iowa fan that has been really fun in the chat. Spaceboy74 is not really thrilled that Ohio State is going to have Iowa firmly in the crosshairs, because I mean, this is going to be the kind of game where Ohio State is going to. I mean, they try to score on every play. That was something that Jim Knowles talked about. Ryan Day's talked about. They try to score on every play, and at some point, that Iowa defense, I think, is going to just the dam is going to break, and it's going to get out of hand.
We have an Iowa show every Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. And I made the comment during the offseason a couple times, the spread on this game is going to be like 21 to 25 points. And my Iowa guy, Corey, just went through the roof. He was like, there's no way. Are you? And I was like, the spread in this game is going to be about over 3 touchdowns. And he just couldn't believe it. And now here we are, because we both expected Iowa to be better and actually have a functional offense. So it's even worse than we expected, and it's 28 or 29 points. Wow, it's crazy. And of course, now Corey's saying there's no way they can cover 29 points, and he might be right, but there is a way. Whether they do or not is another. Yes, Ohio State could cover 29, but I think the conventional wisdom on the Iowa side is, we lose this game 27-6, kind of thing. Like, our defense is really good, and we're just going to hold them down and contain them. And they probably can, but to both of your points, sometimes the dam breaks at some point, like it did in the Big Ten championship against Michigan. It's like a 17-3 game deep into the third quarter. Before you know it, 42-3 final. There you go. All right.
One interesting stat really quick.
Yep.
Maybe in Corey's defense, maybe he looked at what Ohio State's passing yards have been in the last 4 games, 2017, 2013, 2010, and 29. Ohio State has not thrown for more than 222 yards against Iowa in the last 4 games. Granted, we are not, we're looking at a lot of games in much different iterations of what the Ohio State offense could be, would be, and should be. And I expect Ohio State to, I'm going to go out. Tony, how many points is this? Probably a half point. Ohio State will have 222 passing yards by halftime.
Oh, halftime. No, that's a 1 point. That might be a 2 point bold prediction in our bold prediction show. That's pretty good by halftime, 222 yards. Because that is an Iowa defense that does not give up big plays or tries not to. I still think that you can try all you want. It's still going to happen. Like, there's still going to be some big plays, whether it's a catch and a run or a deep shot. Ohio State's going to try to be patient, but when you've got that skill, I don't know that you can just continue to go station to station. You'll die. I think they're going to dial some shots up. They're going to try to scheme up Iowa and get some deep shots in there. So 222, that's a lot, Kevin, in the first half. I thought you were going to say 222 for the entire game. You caught me off guard there.
Yakov 22, appreciate the super chat contribution. Treating running backs as Derrick Henry ruins NFL career. We may comment on that here in a second, Yakov, but we got a guest coming in. Ryan Dawes, thank you so much for the comment as well. And the super chat, we will get to that in just a second, but we do have David Eichholt on the line, Iowa Hawkeye insider for 247 Sports. David, we appreciate you being here.
Hey, Mark, appreciate you having me on. And guys, been listening to the discussion. Just sounds like you're reading the Iowa's obituary, giving a nice eulogy to this game before it begins. But, after watching Iowa's offense for, 6 games or so, I really don't blame you.
I think the lack of scoring is so jarring, and not just because, we cover Ohio State. I think you cover anybody, you cover Iowa, and the lack of touchdowns is jarring. And you return Iowa returns, a starting quarterback from last year, a guy that I believe lost the job as well. But you expect more than what they've gotten. And I don't know, are you seeing the effort from the coaches to change things, or is this just the same thing every single week?
It's interesting because I think when you look at last year, I argued you should have fired a position coach or 2 last season. I mean, look, Iowa won 10 games last year, but Iowa was 121st in total offense. They're 114th in completion percentage. The big difference I see between last year's Iowa team and this year's Iowa team offensively, last year was just much more opportunistic. I mean, Iowa had 25 interceptions. Iowa offense really didn't have to drive the ball down the field because Torrey Taylor was so good. You had Charlie Jones back there that set you up for some nice things. But I went back and looked at just some of the scoring stuff from last year. Iowa had 24 field goals, 4 defensive touchdowns, and 2 special teams touchdowns. Iowa's offense had 29 touchdowns last year. So they were outscored field goals, defensive touchdowns, and special teams touchdowns than the offense. So, I think it's interesting. I think Iowa continues to double down. I mean, we asked Brian Ferentz about, recruiting mobile quarterbacks. Iowa has a couple good up-and-comers in the next couple of recruiting classes, assuming Iowa can hold on to them. But he called it backyard football when a play gets broken down and timing gets disrupted. And I'm like, if I'm any defensive coordinator around the country, I'm licking my chops because you're telling me all I got to do is disrupt timing on a route and the play is dead and you're admitting defeat. Okay. So, I think we're definitely going to see some overturn this offseason, no matter what happens, I think, at this point. And I'm going to compare it to, I don't know if you guys remember back in 2014, Iowa went 4-8. A lot of heat around Kirk Ferentz. A lot of people wanted him fired. Made some changes schematically, did some different things, put CJ Beathard starting quarterback. They go 12-0 in the regular season. But it's going to be a very interesting offseason. And, this doesn't have the vibe whatsoever of the 2017 Iowa-Ohio State game.
He's got to have an occasional conversation with his old buddy, Nick Saban. Nick Saban doesn't like playing football like this either, but it slapped him in the face at some point, and he said, I got to get with the times. I don't like it, but let's upgrade the offense, and let's do it the way everyone else is trending towards, and let's win.
Yeah, my question is, we know that the Iowa defense is very capable. Where are they better suited in terms of trying to attack the Ohio State offense? In terms of, is it against the run? Is it against the pass? What is it that the Iowa defense does that could try and take Ohio State out of its rhythm?
I think Iowa's defensive line is much better this year. I think Iowa's defensive line last year was so young, but they didn't really have that pure sort of pass rusher. Yes, they had Joe Evans, Lucas Van Ness, who I think is going to be a future top 2-round NFL draft pick. He's just built like he belongs to the NFL. But this season, I think Iowa has a little bit better of a pass rush. They can get in the backfield. I think, for example, TreVeyon Henderson's probably the most underrated player in the country. I argued that at the beginning of the season because when you look at this Ohio State team, he's the fourth or fifth name that comes up now between Mayan Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, and CJ Stroud. So I think Iowa's going to obviously prioritize stopping the run. They're going to try to make CJ Stroud throw, and they're just going to trust Phil Parker's secondary. And Iowa's defense this season, guys, has done everything but put the ball in the end zone. You knew when Iowa had that fumble return against Illinois called back, everybody knew the game was over. And I think the Iowa defense knew that as well because that would have secured them the game based on how the defense was playing. So, I think Iowa's going to come out and just try to stop the run. They're going to force CJ Stroud to, scramble around, play some backyard football. But, I think another interesting part of this is as good as Iowa's secondary is, talent matters at the end of the day in these type of matchups. Riley Moss is a stellar corner. I think he's cost himself some money this season. I think he maybe should have left last season. But Kayvon Merriweather is a nice Big Ten safety. I think he's going to at least get a couple training camp opportunities. Guys, he was a 2-star basketball player coming out of high school, and he's going to be defending the son of an NFL Hall of Fame wide receiver. That's the difference that we're talking about here. So, again, I think Iowa's going to really prioritize slowing down Williams and Henderson, and then they're going to throw in maybe a blitz or two to really try to make CJ Stroud uncomfortable. But, at the end of the day, it's very tough for me to imagine how Iowa gets CJ Stroud and this Ohio State team uncomfortable. And like you mentioned, Ryan Day is treating this game like a scar back in 2017. His guys are going to be extra motivated. And I think that this whole season, not to bring up a Michigan thing, but it is basically a revenge season, a revenge tour for this Ohio State team.
Got a super chat coming in from our guy, Ryan. Appreciate you being here, Ryan. Thank you so much for the contribution. Could this be the game where the Ohio State defense gets a pile of turnovers, or does Iowa not take any chances? So that could be answered from both sides here.
Yeah, I think Iowa just really hasn't taken a lot of chances. I think that this is going to be a very important game for Luke Lachey. I think he's going to play well, obviously, his father being Jim Lachey. But Luke really had a great game against Michigan, scored his first career touchdown. Again, I think he's going to be a future NFL tight end. And, listening to Ohio State yesterday, it really seems like their first priority is to lock down those Iowa tight ends. Sam Laporta, I still think, has had some drop issues this season. But ultimately, I think Kirk Ferentz made it very clear yesterday. He's very worried about this Ohio State defensive line. So if Iowa wants to take chances, I don't even know if they'll have the time to be able to develop taking those sort of chances. Because if you look at Iowa's offensive line, look, as bad as Spencer Petras has been, I think that there are so many issues beyond Spencer Petras. I think he's taking the brunt of the criticism, maybe rightfully so. But this Iowa offensive line right now, guys, they're starting 4 sophomores and a freshman. I think they take that next step next year. I think they're going to be very good. But there's 2 entire recruiting classes that aren't contributing on the offensive line right now. So as good as Iowa is at developing, they still have to develop it. And you look at, they still have talent. Connor Colby, who's a 4-star coming out. Logan Jones is a former All-American. I felt bad for him because he's being compared to Tyler Linderbaum, going from defense to offensive line, wearing the same number, both being Iowa kids. Talk about unrealistic expectations from year one. So to answer the question, I don't think Iowa's really going to be able to take those chances. I think Iowa's do what Iowa does, and that's not move the football. They're not going to come out in a 5-wide set. They're not going to throw in a wildcat. And as Brian Ferentz might be digging deep, but even Kirk and Brian have both said, you really can't install new schematics in the middle of the season. So right now it's basically try to improve and improve as quickly as possible. And again, I was going into the game, driven to win, but I think Iowa fans just want to see any sign of life, just somehow resuscitate this Iowa offense to do anything.
It's just too bad they had no signs that the offense wasn't going to be very good this year. But you're right. The offensive line, because this being it's a developmental position at a developmental program. And when the offensive line is so young and hasn't had time you should be 4th year and 5th year guys. And now with COVID, you should have some 6th year guys there as well. And to not have that while everybody else does puts Iowa even further behind. And I think you've seen some of that this year as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of similar to Tony. Yeah, you can't install new schematics or whatever, but what gave them the illusion that the schematics they installed during fall camp were going to work?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? But, I do think that when you look at on paper, I think a couple of things strike me. One, the timing of Charlie Jones' departure probably should have been a bigger warning sign, because if people don't know, he went through Iowa spring camp. Like, he went through spring training. He was expected to be a big part of this team, but reasonably, at least from my perspective, you couldn't prioritize giving Charlie Jones more opportunities over Arlen Bruce and Keegan Johnson just based on what we've seen on the field. But Iowa failed to go in the portal to land playmakers. And that's something where, Mark, you brought up earlier, there's a lot of differences between Nick Saban and Kirk Ferentz, don't get me wrong. But the difference between an all-time great coach and a really good coach is one adapts with the times. And that's exactly what Nick Saban's done at Alabama. Kirk Ferentz hasn't done that. He's shown new wrinkles here and there. But when you get, I think there was a span of 10 games where Iowa threw for one touchdown, guys. And 47% of FBS quarterbacks are transfers. And Iowa's not going in the portal for a quarterback. And they're not trying to replace proven wide receivers, or at least some targets on the field. It should have raised the red flags a little bit more, but you look at the talent that Iowa did return, you thought they would at least take a step forward. And from my account, Iowa not winning the Big Ten West, it's a failure of the season in my book.
There seems to be a philosophy that we recruit players and then we choose the best player for that position. And in this new world of the transfer portal, no, we don't look beyond our walls, because we recruited these guys and we're going to stay loyal to them. And there's a certain sense of that I can take a lot of respect for this program, but stability on one end, stubbornness on the other. There needs to be a balance there. They seem to be going far in one direction toward the stubbornness. And there were 20 plus transfer quarterbacks this year, like capable, better than Spencer Petras quarterbacks, who left programs and went to other programs that you would consider to be on Iowa's level, or maybe not on Iowa's level, that were there.
I do think that this season, if Kirk's going to change at all, he's going to hit the portal. And I know there's going to be a couple names that they're going to monitor. I don't want to release them, just to be fair to the student athlete. If they potentially enter the portal, I don't think it's fair to either program. But there's going to be a couple names that I think will enter the portal, that I'm hearing will enter the portal, that Iowa's definitely going to kick the tires around. And again, and I think you guys brought up earlier when you talk about trying to recruit to a system. Iowa had one of the best running backs in the country committed in Kendrick Raphael, the top 350 kid by 24/7 Sports, 4-star speedster, looked like he'd fit in great. But then after Iowa's all-time historically bad offensive start, he decommitted, and who could really blame him? That's why I'm saying there has to be turnover this year, because you're not only going to struggle getting kids from high school. There's transfers that, who wants to come play a part of the system right now? There's no identity. You look at all-time great Iowa teams, they know what they're about. And I think when you look at this Iowa offense, there's nothing they can really hang their hat on right now.
I think it's really big of you to not say that Bryce Young and Jordan Addison are transferring to Iowa.
Well, good point about the identity. We know Wisconsin's struggling right now, but they also have one of the best backs in the nation in Braylon Allen.
Yep.
When Wisconsin's being Wisconsin, which they have been, except for like 3 seasons in the last 30, people still make fun of Wisconsin. They can't throw it, and they're in the pro set and all that. But they have an effective offense when they're good. It's functional. They have an offensive line. I think most college football fans across the country, if you ask them about Iowa and they're really not paying attention, but they just have this stereotype of Iowa, they believe that Iowa's Wisconsin. Iowa hasn't had a good running game since when?
Probably Akram Wadley, LaShawn Daniels. They each had a 1,000-yard season. But yeah, I'd agree with that. Here's the thing. I think Tyler Goodson ability-wise was there. I also don't think Tyler Goodson's skill set was really fit in with Iowa's scheme. He wasn't between the tackles guy. He was a guy where if you lined him out in the slot, you got him out in the open field, he could shake and bake and make some things happen. But that's why I think the Ohio native, Caleb Johnson, I think has an extremely bright future at Iowa if Iowa can figure out its offensive line, because I haven't seen a guy with that size and speed combination since, I hate to throw the name out there because it's so easy with Sean Green.
I think what Kirk Ferentz needs to do is go find his Kenneth Walker III and then figure out how he's going to spend those $95 million.
Still one of the craziest contracts I've ever seen. Maybe besides Russell Wilson in Denver, might be one of the worst contracts.
Well, Russell Wilson's done a few things to earn that contract.
I agree with you on that.
You're not going to earn it going forward. That's usually the issue in sports.
Yep.
You don't earn it going forward. You earn it for what you did in the past. But not to backtrack on the quarterback situation, because I probably should have brought this up in the midst of the QB discussion, but it's not like Kirk Ferentz has always had this style of quarterback, this type of quarterback. His biggest and initial success was with Brad Banks.
Yep.
And then the couple guys, Drew Tate and others after him, were not to that extent, but mobile quarterbacks. You would think that, okay, he's had his 3 top 10 teams early in his tenure there at Iowa with mobile quarterbacks.
I think Iowa's offense doesn't even really need a mobile quarterback, but they need somebody that can maneuver a pocket. I think that's the thing that stunned me the most about Petrus, because Petrus at times I feel like can stand in there and take a hit. He's shown flashes, but there's just nowhere near the consistency that Iowa needs. Now, I think they need a quarterback that can maneuver the pocket, maybe scramble outside if they have to, just to extend a play. But Iowa ultimately has to change the route trees. They have to land wide receivers, and they have to, I don't want to say do a complete overhaul, but they have to modernize the offense. And I think if you talk about one coach in the country that's more in their ways for good or for bad, it's probably Kirk Ferentz.
Are we saying triple option at Iowa? Maybe they just try and change everything up there, just go triple option.
Well, at this point, people want Cooper DeJean at quarterback because he was going to be offered a quarterback at Virginia when he was coming out of high school.
And just one of my last things is you mentioned the route tree and the simplification of it, and it's a simple offense, and then you knock the timing off, and it's like, now you've already limited what you can do, and then if the timing's not there, when it's hard to have the timing there when everybody knows that this is probably what's coming. It's just, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of the offense isn't going to be there because the design isn't, and everything needs to go perfectly for the offense to work at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. And the crazy part too is I've never seen an offense that is self-described as so complex. I do believe that there's a lot of responsibility in Iowa's quarterbacks in terms of, pre-snap reads, calling things out, looking for blitzes, etc. But you're telling me that Iowa is one of the only programs in the country where you couldn't have a first-year 5-star quarterback come in there and immediately just play? Like, it's going to take 2 or 3 years to learn the playbook. From my vantage point, and I'm sure all of yours, the playbook's about 4 plays long. So, I mean, what makes it so complex? And that's my big thing is Iowa has to find a way to keep that complexity, but simplify enough to move the football, because it's gotten to the point where it's a major win if Iowa moves the ball 5 yards down the field. It's as crazy as Ohio State throwing a 30-yard pass. Like, that's how rare it is at this point for Iowa.
we touched on this before you jumped on, David. Keeping a locker room happy is a difficult thing regardless, just based on playing time, even if you're fairly successful. But the imbalance between offensive success and defensive success, and this defense carrying the offense, does the media ever question the defensive players about just, not that they're going to get anything out of them, but in regards to, what's it like giving up 9 points to Illinois and you lose 9-6? And this happens over and over and over and over.
It's almost to the point where we're almost gaslighting the defense, guys, because they're not going to go out there and throw the offense under the bus, because we've asked them and the response we're getting is, well, you know what? If we would have stopped the run better on first down, we would have given up 3 points. We should have pitched a shutout. And I'm like, guys, like I understand, like I respect the answer, but come on, like at what point are they just going to sit there and be like, we're doing our job? Like somebody has to find a way to move the football. And yeah, I mean, we've asked them, but that's the response we're getting. I mean, even Phil Parker has come out and basically said that too. And they'll say, we're all together on this. We don't care if people believe us or not. But guys, you've been around college football. You've been around locker rooms enough. Good and well, there's plenty of tension in that locker room right now because that offense can't move the football.
I remember asking Malik Hooker after the 31-0 Clemson loss, like in the playoffs, it's like, you defensively, you played well enough to win, don't you think? And he's like, yeah, it's not about that. But you could tell it was about that. It was like he'd given up 24 points to Clemson and not scoring anything. And that's and that was just one game. I couldn't imagine week after week, like you give up 17 points to Ohio State and you're like, well, we've done better than anybody has done since that Clemson game, and we have no shot to win.
David, when was the last time the Iowa offense won a game? Didn't get it in the defense's way, but actually won the game themselves.
That's an interesting question. And I was going to bring this up as a stat too. I went back and looked at all that because a question I posed on my podcast is, you look around the country, when's the last time an Iowa quarterback has put the brunt on their shoulders and said, I'm going to go win that game? And you have to go all the way back to Nate Stanley. When he led the drive against Nebraska, they had the game-winning field goal kick, but he drove them down the field. TJ Hawkinson caught a clutch 4th down during that drive that kept it going. But, off just top of my head, maybe it's just bias, but I mean, Ohio State, 5 touchdowns to the air, Nate Stanley. And Nate Stanley, I think people realize they should have appreciated Nate Stanley more after what they've watched for the past couple of seasons. But go back to the start of the 2017 season. Iowa is 39-3 when they score 21 or more points. 39-3, 21 or more. Not offensive points, total points. And I know this is such a minute point, but if his name's Brian Smith, is he still employed at Iowa? Brian Williams, is he still employed at Iowa? But I can't think off the top of my head that a game that Iowa's offense went out there and won under Petrus. Smackdown against Maryland last year when they put up 55.
When they got 7 turnovers, was it 7? I think
it was
at least 5. I think it was.
Yeah. Well, the wide receiver got hurt for the rest of the season on that kickoff. Iowa got it. And then I think they picked off 3 passes. Spencer had 3 touchdowns and 2 on the ground as well, which were QB sneaks from 1 yard out. Let's not get crazy.
Well, we want to make sure that Kevin gets his time and he's got to go here. Kevin, just remind everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon. You can find me at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, you can find all of our great YouTube videos at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
We give Tony all the difficult questions. So, David, if you can just be patient here for a second. Brian is asking, because we honor all the super chats, do you fire Ryan Day when he loses to Michigan?
How bad's the loss? No, you don't fire Ryan Day if they lose to Michigan. This is a top 5 Michigan team, and it's a rivalry game, and losses happen. If he loses that, he would move to 1-2 against Michigan, which didn't used to be as bad as it is now. But no, you don't fire him. you need to. It would take. I don't know how many losses, Mark, you think it would take to fire Ryan Day, because they're going to be winning 10 games along with those 1 losses to Michigan.
Yeah, if the scenario, Tony, is that the entire season is the typical Ohio State season, except the Michigan game, and he's like going 10-2, 11-1, 10-2, 11-1. I guess if he loses like a 5th consecutive, I don't know, 4 or 5 straight, maybe. How do you get?
But he's going to the playoffs every year,
At that point,
you can't fire a guy for going to the playoffs.
Yeah, at that point,
well, but that becomes another thing where it's like you keep going to the playoffs, but you don't win in the playoffs. How many playoff losses is a fireable offense? And now we're getting into like kooky talk, basically.
Exactly. It is kooky talk to even bring up, but super chat contribution there. David, we could go in so many directions. I'll just throw out a few other things that aren't necessarily questions, but for things for you to respond to. I've heard Kirk Ferentz over the offseason. It seems like every time he's challenged with offensive difficulties, his response is, we won 10 games last year. It's the overall success of the team. Like if you've got a corporation and 2 of the 3 units you have are exceptional, elite at what they do, and the other one is just a disaster, you just ignore it and say, well, we're still making some money, so why improve that unit? That seems to be the defense.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because I was the one who asked Kirk that after the Illinois game, and I knew right when he said it that way that was going to be a very big talking point for the next several weeks. But that's not raising banners, and you have to look at Kirk's a big picture guy, but like you said, you take a step back. They won 10 games in spite of that offense last year. Like there was nothing groundbreaking about that offense last year. I think Keegan Johnson did some nice things. Sam Laporta, I think, is a top 5 tight end in the country. He still has major drop issues that he's going to have to correct. Yeah, Tyler Goodson, who, is a good running back. The scheme didn't fit him. But that defense was, historically great with 25 interceptions. Jack Campbell's a top 3 linebacker in the country. Torrey Taylor, just the Australian college football connection is just incredible. I love hearing about it. But there were so many other factors that contributed to 10 wins. So, and I understand he was fresh off the emotional loss, frustrating loss to Illinois. And he said, our offense took a step back. But if you're going to go back to since 2015, we've had a lot of success since, like you said, they won 10 games last year. Okay, well, guess what? It's modern college football. Times change. People care about this season. They appreciate the 10-win season. And let's not act like the 10-win season ended on a high note. You got curb stomped by Michigan in the Big Ten championship. And then the Kentucky game, they were missing a lot of their key players, and Kentucky still went out there and won. So you lose back-to-back games during a 10-4 season. If just to put it blunt, guys, if everybody on this offensive staff is retained after this year, it's borderline coaching malpractice. I mean, there has to be jobs, there has to be accountability. But I understand Iowa extending Kirk Ferentz. I think he's earned it, like you mentioned earlier, Mark. You built up that sort of repertoire over the course of a career. But just because you earn it doesn't mean you have to stop making good decisions for the football team. Like somebody has to go. And at what point do we question Gary Barta not overstepping Kirk? Because the nepotism rule at Iowa, Gary Barta is Brian Ferentz's direct boss. And Gary said, we have full faith in him. And he's basically leaving it to Kirk. So it's a very complex situation, I think, to put it short.
Anything else, Tony?
Just the record that you mentioned when they scored 21 points or more, you would think that maybe let's try to score. Let's score 21 points more often. And you know what? I bet our record scoring 27 points a game is even better than it would be scoring 21. And has anybody asked him how many touchdowns has last year's record scored this year?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I didn't get a chance to follow up with Kirk on that, but you could tell I think there was a moment in that answer where he kind of tried to backtrack and he kind of knew he messed up, but the damage is already done at that point. And, again, I think Iowa fans, for the most part, they've been a pretty mellow fan base, but this season, just because of the expectation, look, the Big Ten West sucks.
Yep.
This is the worst division in the history of college football in terms of who's going to win. Like Illinois is a good football. Illinois is probably the only good football team in the Big Ten West. I think Purdue's okay. Minnesota should be better because they got off to a hot start. Wisconsin, Iowa are tanking. Nebraska is still Nebraska. But Illinois is going to win it, and Iowa turned 15 stars from last year's 10-win team. And right now, I don't know if they make a bowl game. I would probably bet against it at this point.
I do have an argument for the ACC Coastal, but point well taken. Absolutely
Fair.
right.
That's fair.
And the last thing I have, again, more of a statement than a question that you can respond to. During the entire offseason, we do an Iowa show every Tuesday. Would love to have you on sometime, David. But, logically, rationale tells you if they're 123 in offense out of 131, and with the players they have, you almost could I could almost call the plays and you could just, okay, dive right, dive left, play action, and produce more offense, you would think. But then I also looked at, you lose the best center in the country, you lose Tyrone Tracy, you lose Charlie Jones. Who did they add? And then maybe they are going to be worse. I made that statement a few times thinking, well, they won't be, but they lost better personnel than they've gained. So, and here we are.
I think Iowa, it was a roster mismanagement by Iowa. I do think that losing Keegan Johnson, for him not playing all year, I think that's been a major blow to the offense because I think Keegan's upside is very, very high. He showed big flashes of that last season as well. But Sam Laporte, I thought, would continue to take a step forward. Nico Reganey being hurt for the first 4 weeks, played through injury for the last couple weeks as he gets by 100%. I mean, the first 2 weeks this season, Iowa had one scholarship receiver available. Like, at what point do you just say, we probably got to add some more guys? And again, but if you talk about trying to add guys, it's not a fun offense to recruit to right now. And I think a big part of the missing identity for Iowa, they've gone to more rollouts and bootlegs. You have a non-mobile quarterback and you're running this. And maybe that's to give him more time because the offensive line can't hold up. So I understand that argument. But what made those, I don't want to say great Iowa offenses, but like the average Iowa offense that could produce some big plays, it was run the ball, good offensive line, and the ability to sell the play action. It seems like Iowa just has not been able to sell any sort of play action, maybe since Nate Stanley. And I mean, you look at the play against Michigan State in the Big Ten title game back in, I think, 2015. There were certain plays where you can point to in Iowa. Last year, the Penn State game, that was still a bit more of a rollout, but Iowa's gotten away from that play action. They don't take any chances down the field. Right now, Iowa's offense plays to get in position to punt, and they play not to lose the game. They don't play to win, and I think that's what's really cost Iowa.
David, if you don't mind taking on this super chat, we answer all the super chats and appreciate this. Jordan, again, if Iowa keeps it within 14 points of Ohio State, they should just give Kirk the Coach of the Year award now instead of waiting till season end. So whatever you want to do with that.
Hey, I think Ryan Day is going to have a pretty tough argument because I think this Ohio State team should be expecting a national title. I think they have the most talented wide receiver corps in the history of college football. I think you throw in LSU with Burrow there. I think you could throw in Alabama there, obviously, but I'm telling you that the fact that you lose Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and you talk about, the backups might be just as good, if not better. That's a scary product. So, I think the only way Iowa keeps it within any sort of that is it's going to have a similar start to the 2017 game. And that's why I said earlier, if Iowa wants to make a game out of it, they have to have a momentum snatching play from the very, very start. And, I hate to say it, Iowa might have to score on the defense or special teams because we've seen Iowa get, turn the ball, get turnovers, get in the red zone, get on the 4-yard line, and they still can't put the ball in the end zone. There was an alarming stat. I want to find it, and I want to give credit. It was Scott Docterman from The Athletic wrote about it today, and it was about Iowa's red zone offense specifically. And this is, again, probably the most alarming stat I've seen. Iowa quarterbacks have attempted 15 passes from inside the opponent's 10-yard line in the last 14 games dating back to 2021. There are 7 completions and 1 touchdown. The lone touchdown was Luke Lachey's in the last 10 seconds against Michigan. That's the only touchdown pass. So Iowa tries to run the ball, and then they get scared about, was Spencer going to throw an interception, and then they kick a field goal. Like I said, it's not winning football.
Last statement out of me, and then Tony can close this out with any final thoughts that he has on this matchup or anything else related, would be that if anybody believes that I can only speak for myself, piling on Kirk Ferentz, this is a guy that I still think, to take David's comments, is a really, really good football coach. There's no question about that. He's built a tremendous program there. At one point, I thought he was a great coach. I no longer think he's a great coach. I think he's a really good coach because there's just been too much ineptitude on one side of the ball for me to rate him that high anymore. But so just a tremendous coach that could go off into the sunset, has accomplished a lot of good things, and, you know, continue the Hayden Fry legacy. But it's a bit extreme at this point. Tony, anything else?
I think it's what's the old saying, like, yeah, heroes stay around long enough to become the villain, that sort of thing. And I think you're starting to see something along those lines with Kirk Ferentz. And at some point, you have to recognize that what you're doing isn't working. It's not good enough. And if you don't want to change it, let somebody else do it.
Tony, thanks for being here as always. Tony, Kevin, and Steve make this work each and every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Catch Tony at Buckeye Weekly. That uploads pretty much every day.
Yeah, about every day during the season. Yep.
And BuckeyeHuddle.com. David, thank you so much for joining us. You can catch David's work, Iowa Hawkeye Insider 247 Sports. David, thanks so much for dropping by.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Mark. Tony, nice meeting you.
We'll see everybody back here for Buckeyes Live next Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time.